immediately and act to try to help those vessels or protect that area. And that leads us up to today, where a week or so ago, we're looking at designating a national marine, considering the designation of a national marine sanctuary for this area, which will provide additional protections. There's a lot more history to go into on that, but if you go off of our website, there is a great history of protections poster that covers some of this. And if you go to papahanaumokuakea.gov, you can take a look at that and see some of the additional steps that happen along the way. But that's kind of a snapshot of what's happened in this area. And over that time, we've had a lot more research that's gone on, a lot more cultural activities. The voyaging canoe Hokulea started to train young navigators again, using the island of Nehoa as a over-the-horizon waypoint for young navigators learning how to conduct celestial navigation. We've had cultural access trips, archaeology that's gone on in this area to study some of the archaeological sites. This wonderful deep sea work that Nautilus and others have been doing in the region. So it's really, it's an incredible national treasure, and there's still a lot that we don't know about this region. We only come up here, we have an area that's 1.5 million square kilometers or 580,000 square miles, and only about 130 people or so come up into this area each year. So it's imagine the size of that area stretching from like New Orleans to Las Vegas, and only have 130, 150 people at any given year going up into that area. So you can imagine that we don't get to nearly all of it, and we only see a small part of what's going on in this vast marine realm.
Andy, thank you for that history.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to
quick
know.
Overview. I know it sounds lengthy, but there's so much history to this area and all the different management agencies. We have 7 different management agencies that work to protect this area. We have 2 different parts of NOAA, the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, and NOAA Fisheries. Under Department of Interior and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, we have the Ecological Services Branch, as well as the National Wildlife Refuges. We have the state of Hawaii under Department of Land and Natural Resources. And we have the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and all these have different kuleana or different responsibilities for managing this, but together they all work together through a monument management board to manage and protect this area and issue permits and all those other kinds of things that need to happen to manage a large-scale marine area. Many incredible, I don't know what they call, not feats of nature, but this time of year is really fascinating on the islands because the albatross and a few other seabirds come back in just, oh my gosh, incredible numbers. On Midway Atoll, you have 1.5 million albatross that nest on that island, and they start showing up in November. Around this time of the year, like every available spot on the ground where the albatross can nest is covered by either lace-in albatross or black-footed albatross. And we also have a few that we thought almost were on the verge of extinction, but short-tailed albatross that nest on that island, as well as Curie Atoll. So it's really incredible explosion of wildlife that happens during nesting season on these islands. You walk around, if you go out there to do some research or are part of a counting, they count the albatross every year. You have to be super careful because not only do the birds use every available land area, but you have burrowing seabirds that burrow underneath the shearwaters and the petrels. They turn the island into Swiss cheese. So when people walk to count the albatross every year, they actually wear a kind of converted version of snowshoes.
Oh.
So they displace their weight and don't put their foot through a hole or a burrow to potentially hurt a chick that's underneath. And then you have bushes that are filled with frigate birds and boobies, and you have trees that have little white terns with their cute little eggs that are just perched on branches. So like every surface is covered by seabirds and their eggs. It's quite a spectacle.
And how big is this island?
Midway is very small. Let me just, I can't remember off the top of my head what size. But so I mentioned earlier, there's 500,000 square miles in the monument, and only 6 square miles of that is land. So Midway, trying to figure out some nearly. So the highest elevation on Midway is 43 feet. So it is very small, very low to the ground, like most of these atolls, and there's only 1,500 acres of land in that atoll, just covered in seabirds. There's three islands. There's Sand, Eastern, and Spit Island. And there's actually a runway on there that this was large enough to the space shuttle to consider landing on when the space shuttle was in operation. But it can handle full-size jets, large 747 jets. And the reason why it's there is if you're flying over the Pacific, say from Honolulu to Japan or to China, if one of your engines goes out, you've got to be within a certain distance. I think it's 500 nautical miles of an airstrip, and so Midway serves that location as an emergency landing strip. And every once in a while, we do get a plane that one of the engines goes out, or some other component is not operating right, and they have to conduct an emergency landing on Midway. And so there's a group of people out there that maintain the runway and the fire trucks and other things just for these purposes. Do we get any questions from our audience? Want to know more about?
Yeah, we have a question for you, Andy. Have you heard if Wisdom, the albatross, has returned to Midway this year?
Yes.
Oh.
I think I have heard that she has returned, but won't lay an egg yet until early next year. But as you probably know, she did return last year, and with her did successfully raise a chick. So Wisdom is, for those who don't know, is the oldest known wild bird on the planet, and she is 70 this year, and hatched another chick. And so we don't know how old these birds live, how long these birds live. I mean, they may live as old as 100 or more. We just don't know. So it was tagged on Midway Atoll about 70 years ago, or actually it was 5 years old when they first tagged her. So 65 years ago, tagged here
Wow.
on island. So this tagging program has been going on for a long time, which is really cool because then we um, we know more about these animals. But yeah.
So when did Wisdom start having babies?
I can't remember the age of sexual maturity for albatross. I don't know offhand.
And then she has one baby per year, or?
Yeah, they don't always have. It's not every year. It really depends on things like ocean productivity and how much food that they get. So they can lay one egg every year, but they don't always lay an egg every year. But Wisdom has for the last several years laid an egg every year. So yeah, and so we think, she's at least 70 years old because they think she was 5 years old when she was tagged, but may even be a little bit older than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Andy.
Mm-hmm.
So our rovers are expected to be on deck by 8 o'clock, right, Trevor and Antonella?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So we'll have the blue cam for another hour and 20 minutes. So
Got a lot of time to fill up.
Yeah.
Keep the questions coming.
Yes, viewers out there, keep asking those questions.
So just a slight correction to that. I don't think that they've confirmed that she has arrived yet. I haven't seen a notice that. So they may still be looking for her to arrive. This is still the window of when they do show up. So the first birds do show up at the very beginning of November, and then kind of keep showing up until early December when they come back to pretty much the same nesting site that they've been occupying. They also mate for life, so they mate with they have the same mate. They come back, they greet each other and establish a nest together, and then they take turns traveling several thousand miles to forage for food. They'll fly all the way from Midway to all the way up to the Aleutian Islands to forage in the much more productive waters up there. Over the course of a few weeks, they can take this trip and come back. They're just extremely efficient flyers. They have these incredible adaptations of wings that can lock and hollow bones, so they're light. And they practice this thing called dynamic soaring, which allows them to take advantage of the winds over some of the waves on the ocean. When the wind hits a wave, it creates an updraft, and they utilize that for just cruising for weeks. It's incredible. They'll fly millions of miles in their lifetime.
I'd argue the best bird.
What?
I'd argue they're the best bird.
Yeah.
They're so beautiful.
They are. And you've had the opportunity to hang out with albatross.
I saw him a few times.
Yeah, I got
So,
to
yeah,
hang out
done a
with
good job.
gray-headed
It's fun.
albatross and wandering albatross and I'm spacing on black-browed albatross. Yeah.
Yeah, the wandering albatross, they have a 11-foot wingspan, right? They're just huge.
Yeah, and
Southern Ocean.
their mating is so beautiful to watch. Like their rituals that they do together and their dance that they do together. It's gorgeous.
It is. It's very.
I know. I'm turning myself down. Sorry, everyone.
No. This is amazing. Where are the wandering albatross found?
We filmed them in South Georgia, down in the South Atlantic.
Oh.
Yeah, they're huge.
Wow. Yeah. I go to Savannah, Georgia almost every year.
Savannah.
So how far is that from?
So South Georgia is down in the South Atlantic, so off the coast of South America, the very tip.
By Antarctica.
And then you keep going down, so it's sub-Antarctic, yeah.
Okay, that. South.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, by comparison, the Laysan albatross, which are the dominant species on Midway, their wingspan 6 feet, which is still quite a big bird. If you're standing beside it, it'll come up to my hip, about 3 feet, 3 feet tall, and very awkward on land. They like waddle around and just an incredibly peaceful bird. We've seen a few of them from the ship. I saw a couple of Laysan albatross the other day cruising around the ship, and one black-footed albatross. In Hawaiian, they are moli, is the Laysan albatross, and the black-footed are kaupu.
So can I interject just for a moment?
Do it!
So Aaron, can you access your email from your computer there?
I just got the dive plan and I'm putting the points in now, and I forwarded it to Kate.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
I'm going to need her email address too at some point. I wonder if...
I replied all, so you should get her email then.
Oh, great. Thank you very much.
Yep.
I sort of had to make the dive plan. It's already mostly fleshed out, but I realized that I hadn't actually cut the map for the site because I didn't know what was going to happen with this transit south that we had to make, so I only made plans right up to that point. And it is not on Euphemia Seamount. It's just an unnamed volcano southwest, but we're very close. We're only 16 miles from the site, so it's going to be a very short transit.
Oh. Okay.
So even though Emil is still sleeping and hasn't approved this or talked it over the captain, I suspect that we can get this in the water at noon today. So a pretty quick turnover.
Yay, somebody else gets the blue water.
Yep.
Good job, Chris.
You know what? I was kind of thinking about that.
Oh, we love blue water. We love
blue. Oh, we do?
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, sure. Occasionally, not all the time.
Well, it's more fun to see the seafloor, of course.
Yes.
For everybody, I think. But still, I mean, this isn't...
You do get to see some neat stuff in blue water. Occasionally, some jellies and squid. Those beautiful siphonophores.
So a viewer here says, thank you, Andy. Wisdom and all the albatrosses hold a special place in my heart. I did my California naturalist capstone on how plastic pollution affects the albatrosses on Midway.
Oh, great. Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for that comment.
So I wonder if any plastic pollution ends up in the deep sea, like where these polyapagon sponges are?
Yeah, I don't think so. And the reason for that is that generally speaking, plastic floats. So how would it get down that deep? I mean, maybe there is some kind of plastics that's not buoyant, but most of it seems to float and eventually wind up on shorelines or, you know, is that your impression, Andy?
Yeah.
I mean, you probably know a lot more about this topic than I do.
Yeah, I mean, it is true that we have a tremendous amount of mostly derelict fishing gear in plastic form that washes up on the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. In fact, we might be the poster child for spectacular tropical beaches marred by plastic debris, and I've seen everything there. I mean, cathode ray tubes from old TV sets, these very large light bulbs, bottles, toy plastic army men, a lot of lighters, like from cigarette lighters and things like that, and these other little hollow tubes from the oyster trade. But the real, and those are unfortunate because they're small enough for albatross and other seabirds to consume while they're out foraging for food. You know, it's not that the albatross is dumb or mistakes it for food, but because we have so much more plastic floating out in the ocean, flying fish and other things that attach eggs to floating substrate, which used to be pieces of wood and pumice, and now more and more is plastic. They attach their eggs to the plastic, and the albatross just scoop up the plastic along with the flying fish eggs and ultimately feed it to their chick. I mean, it's crazy. These 1.5 million albatross out on Midway Atoll bring back every year in these tiny plastics they bring back in their stomachs to the island 10,000 pounds of plastic every year in their stomachs that they feed to the chicks. But as Chris said, this is plastic and most of it floats, so it doesn't get down into the deeper environment in general. We get about 52 tons of marine debris that washes into the northwestern Hawaiian Islands every year. And we do try to clean as much of that up as possible. We focus on nets because they're an entanglement hazard for monk seals, endangered monk seals, and threatened green sea turtles, threatened turtles in general. And sharks even, we found sharks that have been caught ghost fishing these nets. They continue to fish while they're on their own. They also ball up into these huge bulldozers essentially and bulldoze the coral reef. So this, over the course of 12 months, the last 12 months, we removed over 300,000 pounds of marine debris from the islands and shallow water habitats. But fortunately for polyopagons and bolsomas and other sponges and animals down here, it doesn't get down this far in general because we don't have an active fishing trade. In other areas where there is trawl nets and things like that, you do see them in these deep sea environments because that's what they're targeting, is the fish communities in these areas, and sometimes the nets get caught on some of these habitats and then they remain there. I mean, the fishermen don't dispose of them. These nets are very expensive, so it's not like they throw them over the side. It's illegal to do that, but they want to maintain their nets. It's just that sometimes they get caught on features that they can't get them loose, or severe weather or things like that. But we don't see that up here because we don't have an active trawl fishery. And I think the last time there was any kind of trawl fishery up on these seamounts was back in the 70s, 60s, 70s. There was a trawl fishery active on some of these seamounts from international fishers before U.S. imposed before the world had this exclusive economic zone agreement where your boundary is 200 nautical miles from land, and that's the nation's right to fish within that area. So prior to that, some of these seamounts were targeted for armorhead and other fish. Chris but
that's correct.
Yeah, the
armorhead, probably Alfonsinos, but I'm not positive. We have a commercially valuable Alfonsino here as part of the groundfish fishery.
Yeah. Yeah, and so actually they did look at that in they did look at the recovery from those earlier trawling fisheries on a few expeditions and over the course of the last several years, and then have found that the seamounts did bounce back pretty well. Some of the coral communities and other things have started to recover, and the fisheries have started to recover. So there is hope even after pretty significant impact. But here again, getting back to here, we haven't seen any trash or marine debris on these islands, and because people are not traversing this area, it's not heavily used. You don't see things like aluminum cans or cans of Spam or other things I've seen in other areas that are more trafficked by like container ships or things like that, or even fishing fleets that are outside exclusive economic zones. I saw that in the mid-Pacific seamounts. Not a lot, but there were some cans on the down 2,000, 3,000 meters down. And a light note around that, I found out something fascinating when I was on RV Falcor under the Schmidt Ocean Institute. We found a few cans, like cans of soda, that were down in this one area, and I didn't know it, but they guys were like they were taking close-ups of the can with the video thing, and they got on the internet, and there's actually a database of logos for like Coca-Cola and other things. And from the structure of the logo, you can kind of date when the can was lost or thrown overboard. And so
Really?
you can, yeah. And so from the logo, you can determine what year or so, or close to year range, that can, and the ones we were finding were like the 70s. There were some pop or soda cans from the 1970s that are down there.
Well, the sort of follow on to that story is I always was asked to help out with the test dives for the Hawaii Undersea Research Laboratory submersibles, the Pisces 4 and the Pisces 5, which of course I immediately agreed to do. And so I got to go down on, you know, the majority of the test dives every year for quite some time, and we were always off of Pearl Harbor somewhere where there's been a lot of disposals, shall we say, and also Honolulu Harbor, because they will dredge Honolulu Harbor and then they'll do the dredge spoil, particularly in the old days out in front. And oftentimes they would dredge up things that people had cast off into the harbor that then would wind up in deep water, not because anyone threw them away in deep water, but because they dredged the harbor. But there's one day that we got down and we see sitting perfectly on the bottom a case of Coca-Cola bottles. And they're all empty. I assume that they'd been consumed or whatever, and who knows, somebody might have just chucked them, or who knows what had happened, but they landed upright. And so the pilot always looks for things like that, because those are exercises for training pilots for the manipulators to actually be able to get these bottles out and then put them in the baskets. So he started collecting these Coca-Cola bottles, and I got one. He gave me one, and it dated to 1941.
Wow.
So it was the beginning of World War II.
Yeah.
And I still have that bottle.
It's a good memento.
It's just kind of, you just never know. He was very big on collecting some of the old Navy dinner plates and bases and cups, and he actually knew which were older and which were newer.
That's cool.
And I wound up getting one of the old ones finally, because I was down there as well.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of fun things. He'd give them to people, everybody on the boat, helping out. And it's an exercise. It's kind of cleaning up the bottom, and then people go with a souvenir as well.
True.
So that bottle, is that a plastic bottle or a glass?
It's the old glass Coca-Cola bottles that they used to have. It's one of those.
I mean, they didn't even really have plastics then. I mean, it's that's one of the things that's so absolutely terrifying about the whole plastics issue, is that material really hasn't been in widespread use for more than 60 years. It's really only the last 60 years or so that plastics have been in widespread use, and now we find them in the digestive tracts of fish in nearly every ocean, and in human beings from bioaccumulation up the food chain. They're everywhere. I find them in the Antarctic, I find them deep sea, we found them in the Marianas Trench, I mean, some of the ones that can sink. And yeah, so that's what I find terrifying. I mean, it's an amazing material, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's revolutionized so many different industries, the medical industry, so many different adapted clothing, other things. But at the same time, when you use it for a disposable purpose, when you take a material that sits around for several hundred years in the environment, and you go into 7-Eleven and you get your single bottle of soda, and you drink it in a couple of minutes, and then you've only used it for a few minutes, and you throw it in the trash, or even try to recycle it, and then it sits in the environment for 700 years. That doesn't work very well. So
there are people, if I'm not mistaken, that are working on types of plastics that serve the same function, but actually decompose at a much faster rate.
Yeah.
So I think I have.
We have hope.
This is going to really, I don't know if I should say this, but I sometimes watch Shark Tank. And I like it just because these are entrepreneurs that come up there and they throw out these ideas, and some of them are really good. And I think one of the good ones was this guy who was coming up with a compostable or a type of a plastic that would be much better for the environment. And I think he got some investors interested in that whole product, if I remember. It was a little while ago.
some out of algae. I've heard some of the kind of similar plastic material out of algae.
I have a feeling that that's going to be the future for plastics. That they're going to, not all plastics, but the ones that certainly are very common and often get thrown away, they're going to find how to make plastics that'll take much less time to decompose, so it'll be much less of an environmental problem.
Yeah. As long as they were able to fully degrade, some of the challenges with the biodegradable plastics we have now is that they really don't go away. All they do is degrade into smaller and smaller pieces.
Right.
And then we start to see these things again in fish and accumulating up the food chain, so they come right back to us. It's the ultimate form of recycling in some way.
Well, I'm starting to remember this whole thing, and this guy, he was making plastic forks and plastic spoons, but they weren't plastic.
Mm-hmm.
They were some type of
Corn
cellulose
starch.
product or something, and that you actually, once you finished eating your ice cream or whatever you were eating with the utensils, then you ate the utensils, and he was making them in different flavors.
Oh, that's cool.
So everything is being utilized. It was a pretty cool episode. Well, there's a lot of people out there trying to come up with some really novel ideas to solve problems.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So we got any more?
No questions, but a few comments from Jason. He has been dating bottles too. And then balloons. He lost count of how many balloons he's observed on the ocean floor.
Wow.
Um,
But you know, some of the dredge spoil that came out from Honolulu Harbor, and they also dredge Pearl Harbor too, so you never know what's going to happen. We've seen all types of stuff. We've seen like lawn chairs.
Oh, boy.
I think Trevor had mentioned he'd seen a toilet with a bathtub. I've seen toilets. I haven't seen a bathtub yet, so you got
have
me
you seen
there.
a couch yet? Or
What's that?
a couch?
No, not a couch.
I've seen
yet.
patio furniture. I haven't seen a couch though.
Yeah, I've seen patio furniture. That's what it is. But it was always with sort of dredge spoil. It didn't. It's like they didn't purposely throw it off a boat. They threw it in the harbor, or it fell into the harbor. Somebody was, accidentally got blown into a harbor, and then it wound up getting dredged when they were dredging the harbor and dumped outside.
Yeah. Yeah, for many years, many cities, I mean, I grew up on the East Coast, New York City area, and know that up until the 70s, they took all their trash and just shipped it out and dumped it into the Hudson Canyon, and there's a whole...
What's interesting is you can sort of view a little bit of the history of dredge spoils off of Honolulu if you take a look at the seafloor backscatter, which is, that as Aaron was talking about, I think it was yesterday, talking about how backscatter is sort of giving you an idea of the texture of the seafloor. It doesn't give you depth, but it gives you the reflectivity, so you can determine whether it's soft or hard. And you see right outside of Honolulu and Pearl Harbor these perfectly round, almost like targets, kind of like the radar here you're looking at, or excuse me, not radar, sonar screens, perfectly round targets of hard returns. And in the old days when they were dredging the harbor, they used to open the doors on the barge and the whole thing would just go down as a mass and then kaplunk, and it would form this round pile of debris. And then later on, they sort of had a slit type of door, if I understand everything right. So they would motor forward, and then you see these kind of stripes of dredge spoil where it's spread out over a longer distance.
Yeah.
That's a classic Jim Gardner data set that was like part of our demonstration repertoire at Fledermaus, because classic Oahu, the bathymetry topography, and then the backscatter and just laying out those dredge spoils. I'm going to find it and look at it next blue water.
And that was mapped in 1998, if I remember correctly, Aaron. When they were out here.
That probably sounds about right.
So it was pretty cool to go down there and see these things. And there are a couple of wrecks that we found down there where they dumped right on top of the wreck.
Well, corals, I mean, think about the corals. That's one of the things that we're thinking about, well, the future upcoming deep sea mining when after they collect the material, bring it up to the surface and process it, and then they're going to release it back into the ocean. It creates kind of a big sediment plume, and we don't know what the impact of that is going to be for the deep sea, because even if we look at these in corals that were sponges we were just looking at, they would choke them up completely if they got covered by a large deposition of sediment, and they wouldn't be able to
Canadian
filter feed
amazing
as well.
software. It's a, sorry, I didn't mean to be on SPL there.
Yeah, yeah, we get other questions for Dada?
No questions from the audience yet. We still have 54 viewers.
Nice.
So, yeah, send us your questions with your name and the place you're watching us from.
Well, we can talk a little bit about cool wrecks off of Oahu that I was fortunate enough to visit in the submersible during test dives. And
Sure.
We have seen just about everything down there, just because you're not only outside of a huge naval base out there, but you're also outside of a very, a pretty large city, Honolulu as well. So you'd expect to see a lot of things. But we went, and also Barber's Point, which was an airfield or an air base as well. So there's a lot of things going on. But one of the, I guess you could call this a wreck, but it was an airplane. And it was a biplane float plane. It was really, really early development of float planes, and it was all kind of wood and fabric with some type of metal as well. So the frame was metal, and you could see that in the wheels, and you could see that it was a biplane. The metal struts would go out a little far. The wings were gone because they were canvas and wood. But the pilots and the I don't know if it'd be a gunner or just another observer, they had two round cockpits right sort of in the nose of the thing, and they would sit there without any type of glass or anything else. They'd sit there open.
Oh, wow.
In the float plane, and you could see all this detail, and then they'd have really cool logos on the side of them, like a flying blue elephant, I think was one of them. And just seeing this thing down on the seafloor is really quite,
That's
quite
wild.
amazing.
Oh.
So that was one.
Yeah.
I could talk about wrecks all day long. I sure saw.
And of course, the Japanese mini sub, which you guys.
Yeah, but also the really large aircraft carrier submarines that Japan was building as well. The I-401, the I-400, the I-14 that were all captured at the end of the war. We found them all down there, and there are all types of tricks we use to try to locate where these wrecks were. Oftentimes, one of the reasons they're out there is because after they were captured and sort of studied, if you will, because they're very advanced submarines, if you think about it, how on earth do you launch a plane from the submarine? And they figured it out. There was a hangar on the back of the submarine.
Wow.
That would open up, and these planes had folding wings so that they could fit inside the hangar, and they would sort of surface at night or something like that, and then the plane was supposed to come out, to the back of the submarine, and then the wings would fold out, and then it would take off from the back of the submarine.
And there was enough runway on the submarine to
apparently, but even if there wasn't, I think these were sort of float. Well, there was a rail, so it was like a catapult, like modern aircraft carriers.
Yeah.
And so they would sort of shoot it off the back deck of the, with some type of slingshot type of device. And then the planes would have some bombs or something where then they could deploy the bombs. But anyway, they're very sort of famous, particularly the I-400 was a very, very famous submarine. And they took them out after they studied them very well, and they used them as targets because they're such huge submarines. They were testing prototype torpedoes and other things out there, so they persisted out there. And I was fortunate to dive on a couple of those, the I-401 and the I-14. And it's stunning when you come across one of these. They were split in half by the torpedo. And I came across the end, one of the broken ends of the bow, I think. It was broken right aft of the sail, or the conning tower, if you will. I think it's called a sail. And I mean, you're looking, essentially you come up on it and it was so huge. You were seeing this wall of metal bulkheads and floors in front of you stacked like a pancake stack.
Yeah.
And you just look up through the window and it's as far as you could see up there. And you're just, oh my God. And you're just looking at this thing, you know, and then you go up and over and then you survey down and you can survey the deck and see the deck guns and the conning tower and the periscope. I think it was the I-14 was sticking way out of its sleeve.
Huh.
And it was totally uncorroded. I don't know what the metal was on it, but it was absolutely bright, shiny metal.
Wow, that's incredible.
But yeah, they tend to be hazardous because there's a considerable amount of metal, jagged metal debris all around that.
Yeah.
In that case, and so pilots have to be extremely careful.
How deep were those?
Those are anywhere between 4 or 5. No, excuse me. They were deeper, probably about 800 meters deep or so. And then only one of them, you know, there's always an action report because these weren't part of the war. These are after the war, and they were sunk purposely.
Yeah.
So it was documented, and they have, you know, the positions of how the ship went out, you know, with the submarine towed out to this position. And then, of course, they didn't have GPS back then.
Right.
And they would tow them to this particular position and lineups, and then they would go ahead and sink the submarine, and then they would go back in. And when you took a look at the data, you know, you could go to that spot, and except for one time, it wasn't there. Like you could, but there was one time the I-401 where it was was actually found through that report.
Interesting.
And the other ones were not, and we had to be kind of clever to actually find those wrecks, and we found them 2 different ways where their final resting places were. Again, they weren't really war grave sites because there's nobody in the subs.
Right.
They were sunk in that case. But there's stories, a lot of stories about all of these things, you know. And that's pretty fascinating.
How long were they?
Well, the I-400 is 400 feet long.
Wow.
So at that time, it was the largest submarine in the world, as I recall, and the most advanced submarine in the world. So, and also, if I'm not mistaken, at one point in the war, the Japanese government had developed the most technologically advanced torpedo as well on it. So that was, I guess, sort of the game after the war, is everyone was trying to take a look at where everybody else was and what they had developed at that time. But so our pilot, Terry Kirby, he is also an artist, and he paints a lot. And I've been in communication with him fairly frequently since we moved to Washington State. And because he's retired now and not doing the subs, he's had a lot of time for painting. And he's painting these scenes, particularly of some of the things that we found off of Pearl Harbor and Honolulu.
Yeah.
He's been painting them from memory.
Yeah.
And he's doing this beautiful job of some of these really cool things that bring back a lot of memories for me. And one of the ones that was very, very interesting was, nobody knows why this happened or the context, but at some point, somebody dumped a whole lot of really old cars out off of Honolulu.
Yeah.
And it's like the ancient car field out there. And you find yourself down, and there's all, you know, the old... you know, they don't even have hoods on the tops of them, the old Model Ts with the 2 big...
Yeah.
I can't describe them, those really old cars. And they're just sitting all around. And you just go from one car to the other, and they all have those Brazilian Sea Stars all over them.
Wow.
They're perching on them.
Yeah.
Up there. And it's just surreal. Like you're looking at a deep sea car dealership.
Yeah.
But there are really sort of interesting, sort of fun things and we've seen tractors down there. Somebody went and dumped some bulldozers.
Jeez.
Down there, and they're like upside down off of Honolulu Harbor. You just never know what you're going to find. and other planes too. We found there was one, this is a tragic story, but I picked it up on side scan sonar because I was doing towing out there. It was a little Cessna, as I recall, Cessna 150, if I remember. And we thought it was a plane. The target looked like a plane, so we went down there, and sure enough, it was. And it was upside down, but in perfect shape. And right out in front of the propeller was somebody's luggage, hand luggage, carry-on luggage.
Oh, wow.
And we actually recovered that and also noted what the number of the plane was, and then we were able to look at the story. And this was a pilot who was attempting to come from Maui, I think, and fly to Honolulu, and he did not calculate the amount of gas he needed
on
that trip, and so the plane went down before it got to Honolulu Airport, just short of it. And unfortunately, he had 2 passengers and himself, and unfortunately, all 3 died. They recovered the bodies of the 2 passengers, but they never recovered his body. But that handbag belonged to him on there, and you still had some evidence in there of who he was.
Oh,
but
it's wild.
Strange
tales of the deep sea.
Anyway, I told you, I mean, we got to get out of the blue water. I can tell stories all day long like this. I'll drive you all crazy.
We have a few more comments here from our audience on nautiluslive.org.
Thank you. You rescued everybody.
We have a few questions for the pilots, but I'm going to do the smaller questions now. Really glad that you're doing this sort of live. I watch this live every day while studying. I'm a marine biology student, so I'm really interested in this. Just want to send my gratitude and good luck to the team.
Yeah, thank you very much for that comment. And we're actually very delighted to be able to provide this live to you folks.
Yeah, these blue water chats are so interesting. You guys and girls are awesome. Terry from Vancouver.
Vancouver.
There's somebody asking about where that submarine was found, and yes, that's correct. And it's probably, you can find, if you were to Google the I-14 or I-400 or I-401, you can probably find pictures of the wrecks. And of the I-400, that's the one I did not dive on personally, but I was on the ship during the dive. There was some marine archaeologists on board because they had actually found the ship bell on that one. And they had a whole thing where they went out and collected the ship bell and did a ceremony and everything else because that was so valuable. And I don't know where it is exactly, whether it was repatriated to Japan or whether it's in some museum somewhere, but yeah, I still have pictures of that bell that I took personally on the deck after they had brought it up. Very historic bell and a very historic submarine. And there's quite a story about the I-400 and the mission there. This was at the end of the war, and these submarines were headed to the Panama Canal with these planes, and the plan was to actually bomb the Panama Canal. And then the war ended, and the submarines then were captured before they actually got down there. So captured, I don't know if that's the right word, but that was the end of the war. Thank goodness.
Yeah. So the question here for the pilots, do the rover pilots, how much training is there before an expedition? Also, is there, do the controls react to current IE? Do you feel the resistance in the controls?
Do you want either of those? So training beforehand would just come from previous cruises. I don't know really how to answer that, but we just kind of carry the skills over from one cruise to another. But there's no real specific training for a specific cruise. The current, you notice in how the vehicle moves. So if you're sitting on the bottom or just above the bottom, again, getting pushed off one way or the other, then you have to fight that. So that's kind of all visual. or instrumentation, but it's not, there's no current sensor or anything like that. I don't really know how to answer it better than that.
Yeah, thank you.
If someone was wanting to become an ROV pilot for something like this, what are some good schools to go to and what are some good things to study?
To become an ROV pilot?
Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing about like all the pilots that work out here is they all come from very different backgrounds. Some come from commercial oil and gas ROVs. Some come from ROV school, which is one, and the only one I know of is in Memorial University of Newfoundland in Canada. But I'm a mechanical engineer, a Bachelor of Mechanical Engineering. There's a couple of PhD students or graduates in all sorts of different studies. The ROV department lead is a professional biologist. There's electronics techs, there's, you name it, people come out here. I don't know, the importance is the ability to learn a variety of skill sets instead of just being really good at one thing. You got to be kind of pretty good at a lot of things. And ability to have some technical know-how and, you know, use your hands, using tools, do some electronics troubleshooting, do some mechanical troubleshooting, and the rest is just kind of learned on the go. So a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different ways people came out here, ways people got into the industry. But if you're in a university program or just recently graduated, definitely look into the internship programs on Nautilus through Ocean Exploration Trust are really great. And we try to bring out ROV interns for several cruises a year. I'm not totally sure what the schedules are like for that, but in general, it's a thing that OET does, and it's really great to get people experience and exposure to this kind of stuff, even from a whole smattering of different backgrounds.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Aaron, and the answers, Trevor. Here's another question. Are the ROV manipulators delicate enough to be able to have an undersea tea party? That comes from Andra in Southern California. What is the most fragile thing the claw has been able to pick up or hold?
It's a good question. You can just about pick up an egg with the starboard manipulator. The port manipulator can't do anything really. I mean, it's very strong, but it's not subtle. Stand by a sec. Nah, he's fine. Yeah, the port manipulator does not have any nuance or subtlety or dexterity, but the starboard one could have a tea party. I think it could have a tea party. It might need the more robust ceramic mugs, not some of these little dainty fragile ones, but it could hold a ceramic mug and not break it.
Interesting, that top one, he calls himself Palo Boy from Aiea Heights, and Palo is an expression that we used to use where you put down a cloth bag with bait in it when you're doing deep water bottom fishing. But he was asking about seasickness, whether any of us wound up getting seasickness. And a couple of us, I guess, on the ship when we were transiting up here, got a little bit queasy, shall we say. But not too many. Most of the people on the ship are pretty used to the motion that you experience out here.
Shout out from the navigator who gets deadly seasick every single cruise and wears skylamine the entire time.
Yeah.
So I feel for the people who also feel that way.
Yeah, a lot of patches on the ship, at least initially.
No, I'm still wearing mine.
Yeah, I had never been on a ship more than 3 hours, and I take my Dramamine pill every morning. If I forget, my stomach gets a little queasy and I run down and get my pill.
Well, we've been pretty fortunate in a lot of the seas up here. Most of the crews have been quite calmer than normal. And today it's absolute glass out there.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
I think that's the thing too, though. Seasickness can happen to anyone. It's not like whether or not you're strong or anything. It's just it can hit anyone.
Well, that's why I feel like I need to speak up, because it's I function and I feel better with a patch, but it's like for most people, they get over in a couple days, but I want everyone to know that's not necessarily true for everybody.
Yeah.
And I've been doing this for long enough that I don't need to be told either that,
Yeah.
oh, you should be fine. Thank you for that opinion, but I'm not.
Yeah.
It's not exposure, it's not experience, it's not pushing through or something like that. That's not at all. It's
no,
just luck.
and it doesn't matter how young you start getting on boats. Anyone can get seasick.
Everyone gets seasick, just everyone has different thresholds.
Yeah, some people just get really sleepy. Some people feel really ill.
They talk about that with some of the lifeboats, that in the little care package that come with the lifeboat, it's not just food and water, but it's also seasickness pills, which is important because if you start vomiting, you're going to die sooner. And they say you get in the lifeboat, take the pill. Oh, but I don't get seasick. Yes, you do. You will, absolutely.
Especially as you get more dehydrated.
Exactly. You get seasick in a lifeboat. Everybody does.
And I guess not everything works for everyone. I tried the patch the other day, and that did not work. So.
No, not everyone reacts differently. It seems to different seasickness medications and different types of medications or ginger or whatever it might be. It doesn't work for some people, and it does for others. So you often, when you first get on a boat, have to try a bunch of different things to see if any of them actually do work for you. It's not, if you talk to someone and they say, oh, well, this helped my seasickness, that doesn't mean it will help yours.
Totally.
So it's finding, what works for you and what doesn't, or if anything does. But just because you get seasick doesn't mean you can't do stuff like this.
Yeah, I guess that's the main message here, is that there are ways to get around it, so that you shouldn't be intimidated from going out on a ship. If you get an opportunity like this to come out and you're worried about that, then you just need to talk to your doctor and try to get some options there that you can take out with you and give it a go.
Yeah. We have a kid question. Has anyone ever hugged a rover after it's come on board? After a dive?
Did you say a kid question?
A kid.
That's what it says.
Has anyone ever hugged one?
Yeah, it's a young boy or a girl who's asking this question.
Oh my gosh, I hugged Herc when I got on after the big recovery.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I give him a little pat every time I walk by.
The captain of the ship did. Actually, there's a great photo of the captain hugging Hercules after it was recovered.
Yeah, I'm sure the viewers send virtual hugs too. They were all following the story.
Getting back to the marine debris question, the folks from the last watch told me they did find a net. What they did is find a fishing net.
Yikes.
Really?
During the last dive.
That's scary.
Yeah, green fishing net kind of between the two knolls that we were working between.
Did anyone talk about that whale skull that was found a few days ago? I saw a picture of it finally, and then they have somebody who identified it, Diva Amon, who I know who that is. She apparently identified it as a beaked whale. It's sort of a rare deep diving whale.
Yeah.
Who found that?
One of the watches found the skull of a whale.
No way.
And it's fossilized. I mean, it had a lot of manganese crust on it.
This is the first I've heard.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
I've been napping too much, apparently, between watches.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know either. I just happened to be out in the galley, and Emil was sort of showing some pictures about and getting some feedback about this whale skull. I think it was Cuvier's beaked whale, if I'm not mistaken. And I looked at it, and it's very strange. I mean, if you were to see it, you'd know it was not normal. It wasn't a rock.
Another question for the pilots. During a shift change, in what configuration is the ROV positioned until the next pilot assumes control? From Patricia in Tennessee.
What position are the ROVs in during a shift change? Is that correct?
Yes.
Well, what do you do to ensure that the ROV is safe while you're swapping out seats? I think is the question.
Yeah, so oftentimes there's some periods where things are settled, nothing's moving too much, and that's a really good time to shift over. Sometimes shift change happens to happen, you know, during a